The meeting room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air system. Commander Zethkar sat at the metal table, his forearms resting on the surface. Deep scars ran across his blue-gray skin, telling stories of old battles. His armor was polished for the ceremony, but the dents and scratches from years of war could still be seen. 20 young officers sat in rows before him. They were all from different worlds in the galaxy. Some had green skin, others had fur, and a few had scales. But they all shared one thing. They had never fought humans in war. Zethkar looked at each face. These young soldiers thought they knew about fighting. They had studied at the best military schools. They had read books about famous battles. They had practiced with the newest weapons. But none of them understood what real war was like. "You think you know about warfare," Zethkar said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "You have read about the great battles. You have learned about strategy and tactics, but you have never faced humans in combat." One young officer, a green-skinned female from Vega Prime, raised her hand. "Sir, the human war ended 10 years ago. Why should we study a defeated enemy?" Zethkar's eyes, large and black like a night sky, fixed on her. "Who told you the humans were defeated?" The room became very quiet. The young officers looked at each other with confusion. "The Terran War ended with a treaty," Zethkar continued. "But it was not the kind of treaty you might think. Today I will tell you why that war still gives me nightmares. I will tell you why I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the humans I fought." He stood up slowly. His tall frame cast a long shadow across the room. Even with his injuries, he was still an impressive sight. This was a soldier who had commanded fleets and conquered worlds. 30 years ago, I was like you. I was young and confident. I had won every battle I fought. The Altaran Empire was the strongest force in the galaxy, and I was one of its best commanders. When the humans first appeared, we thought they were just another weak species that would bow to our power. Zethkar walked to the large window that looked out into space. Stars dotted the darkness like tiny diamonds. Somewhere out there was Earth, the human homeworld that had changed everything. The humans had just learned to travel faster than light. Their ships were small and crude compared to ours. Their weapons were basic. Their technology was hundreds of years behind ours. When our scouts first saw them, they laughed. He turned back to face the young officers. But there was something different about the humans. Something we did not understand at first. When we sent our usual demands for tribute, they said no. "Most species surrender immediately when they see our fleet," Zethkar explained. "They know they cannot win against us. They accept our protection and pay the tribute. It is how the galaxy has worked for thousands of years. The strong rule the weak and everyone knows their place." A young officer with red fur raised his hand. "What kind of tribute did you demand?" "The standard amount," Zethkar replied. "Half of their industrial output, half of their food production, and half of their young people to serve in our armies." It was not unusual. Every species in the galaxy pays the same. "But the humans said no?" asked another officer. "Not just no," Zethkar said with a bitter laugh. "Their representative, a man named Captain Jake Miller, looked at our demands and smiled. He actually smiled. Then he said something I will never forget." Zethkar paused, remembering that day 30 years ago. The human captain had been so calm, so sure of himself. It had been impossible to understand at the time. He said, "We appreciate the offer, but we'll handle our own protection. Thanks anyway." Then he walked out of the meeting. The young officers murmured among themselves. Such disrespect was unheard of. No species had ever refused Altaran protection before. "Our high command was insulted," Zethkar continued. "They thought the humans were simply ignorant. They believed that once we showed them our power, they would quickly surrender. So they ordered me to take the Third Assault Fleet to Earth and make an example of them. I was excited," he admitted. "This would be an easy victory, another world to add to the Empire. I had 15,000 of our best warriors, 50 battleships, and hundreds of smaller vessels. The humans had maybe a dozen crude ships and a few million soldiers with basic weapons." Zethkar sat back down, his movements slow and careful. The wounds from old battles still caused him pain. I remember thinking it would be over in a few days. We would destroy their fleet, land on their world and accept their surrender. Then we would move on to the next system. It was supposed to be simple. He looked directly at the young officers. But nothing about fighting humans is simple. Nothing about them follows the rules of war that every other species understands. They fight like no one else in the galaxy. Before we reached Earth, we decided to test their defenses on one of their outer colonies, a small world called New Haven with only a few million people. We thought it would be good practice for our troops. Zethkar's voice became quieter. That was where I first learned what humans are really like. That was where I began to understand why they said no to our demands. And that was where I started, having the dreams that still wake me up at night. The room was completely silent now. Even the air system seemed to have stopped humming. The young officers leaned forward, waiting for the commander to continue his story. New Haven changed everything, Zethkar said. It was supposed to be a simple conquest. Instead, it became the first lesson in why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Commander Zethkar stood at the window for a long moment, staring out at the stars. The young officers waited in silence, sensing that something important was coming. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer, but somehow more frightening. New Haven was a farming world, he began. 3 million humans lived there, growing food for other human colonies. They had one small city and many scattered farms. Our intelligence said they had maybe 3,000 soldiers to defend the entire planet. He turned back to face the room. I brought 15,000 of our best warriors. Our ships could destroy their city from orbit in minutes. This should have been over before it started. Zethkar walked slowly between the rows of young officers. The human commander was Colonel Lisa Hayes. She was small, even for a human. Maybe half my height and much lighter. When we sent our surrender demand, she sent back a message with just 2 words. What did she say? Asked a young officer with purple skin. Come and take it, Zethkar replied. That was all. No explanation, no negotiation, no fear. Just those 4 words. The alien commander sat down heavily. I thought she was being foolish. We had 5 times more soldiers than they did. Our weapons were better. Our armor was stronger. Our technology was centuries ahead of theirs. How could they possibly resist? I decided to make a show of force first. We would destroy some empty buildings from orbit, then demand surrender again. Most species give up after seeing what our weapons can do. But when our ships fired at the empty warehouses outside the city, something strange happened. Zethkar paused, remembering. The humans fired back, not at our ships, but at their own buildings. They destroyed their own food stores, their own factories, their own fuel depots. Everything we might want to capture, they destroyed before we could take it. One of the young officers looked confused. Why would they destroy their own supplies? Because they understood something we did not, Zethkar explained. They knew this was not going to be a quick battle. They were preparing for a long war, and they were making sure we could not use their own resources against them. Then came the ground assault. I sent my best troops to secure the city. Standard procedure. Fast attack, overwhelm the defenses, capture the leaders. But the humans were not where they were supposed to be. Zethkar's eyes grew distant. Our forces entered the city and found it empty. No soldiers, no civilians, no resistance at all. My commanders reported that the conquest was complete. But then the real fighting started. The humans did not fight us in the open. They hid in buildings, in sewers, in tunnels we did not know existed. They would attack our patrols and then disappear. When we tried to chase them, we found traps and ambushes waiting for us. The alien commander stood up and began pacing again. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was how they fought. In every other war I had been in, soldiers tried to protect their wounded. They would retreat to save their injured comrades. But humans used their wounded as weapons. The young officers looked shocked. What do you mean? One asked. They would let us see their wounded soldiers calling for help. When our medics went to help them, the wounded humans would detonate explosives. They would sacrifice themselves to kill our doctors and nurses. Our own compassion became a weapon against us. Sethkar's voice became harder. We learned to ignore wounded humans, but then they started using fake wounded soldiers. Some were really hurt, some were pretending. We could not tell the difference, so we had to choose, risk our medics or let wounded enemies suffer. The humans made sure we could not win either way. If we helped their wounded, some of them would kill our people. If we ignored their wounded, we looked cruel and heartless to our own soldiers. They turned our mercy into a weakness. The room was very quiet now. These young officers had never heard of such tactics before. But the humans were not finished. Sethkar continued. They had more surprises. Colonel Hayes sent children to carry messages between their hidden groups. Children. Our sensors could not detect them because they were so small. And what soldier wants to shoot a child? The children would run through our lines, passing information to human fighters. They knew our patrols routes, our guard schedules, our weapon positions. The humans always seemed to know where we were going before we got there. Sethkar sat down again, looking tired. We controlled the city during the day, but at night it belonged to the humans. They would attack our posts, destroy our equipment, and disappear before we could respond. We were losing soldiers every day, but we never seemed to kill any of them. After 2 weeks of this, I decided to end it. I ordered a full assault on the human positions. We would use everything we had to crush them once and for all. The alien commander's voice became very quiet. That was when I met Staff Sergeant Tony Rodriguez. He was a human pilot who flew one of their small fighter ships. Nothing special about him, just another human soldier. But what he did that day changed everything. Our assault was working. We had broken through their defenses and were about to capture their command center. Victory was within our grasp. But Rodriguez flew his damaged fighter straight at our command ship. Sethkar looked directly at the young officers. He could have escaped. His ship was fast enough to get away. But instead, he aimed at our shield, generators, and kept flying. We shot at him, but he did not turn away. He just kept coming. I heard his last transmission over our communication system. He said, "Tell my kids Daddy kept his promise." Then his ship hit our shields and exploded. Room was completely silent. Even the air system seemed to have stopped. The explosion destroyed our shield generators. Without shields, our command ship was vulnerable. But Rodriguez was dead. One human soldier trading his life for a chance to hurt us. Sethkar stood up slowly. We won the battle for New Haven. The human resistance was finally crushed. Colonel Hayes was captured. The planet was ours, but 60% of my soldiers were dead or wounded. He looked at each young officer in turn. I had won, but it felt like losing. And I knew this was just the beginning. If one small colony could cost us so much, what would happen when we reached Earth? Commander Sethkar walked to his chair and sat down slowly. The young officers could see the pain in his movements. Old wounds from battles that happened long ago still hurt him every day. After New Haven, I thought I understood humans, he said. I thought they were just stubborn fighters who would rather die than surrender. I was wrong. I had no idea what they were really capable of. He looked at the faces watching him. The High Command was angry about our losses at New Haven. They decided to send the entire Alteran fleet to Earth. Every ship we had, every soldier we could spare, 1 million warriors, 500 battleships, and thousands of smaller vessels. Surely that was enough to defeat them? Asked a young officer with silver skin. Sethkar made a sound that might have been laughter, but there was no joy in it. We thought so. The humans had maybe 50 ships total and a few million soldiers. How could they stand against the entire might of our empire? We spent 6 months preparing for the assault. During that time, human ships kept appearing near our worlds, watching us, then disappearing. We tried to catch them, but they were too fast. They would jump to faster than light speed the moment we got close. The alien commander's eyes grew distant. We thought they were scared. We thought they were running away, but they were not running. They were learning. Every time they saw our ships, they learned something new about how we fought. When we finally reached the Earth system, I expected to find their fleet waiting for us. That is how every other species fights. ship against ship in open battle, but the humans were nowhere to be seen. Zethkar stood up and walked to the window again. Their commander was Admiral Kate Morrison. We intercepted some of her communications, but we never found where she was hiding. Some of our intelligence officers thought she was commanding the defense from a bunker on Earth. Others believed she was on a hidden ship somewhere in the system. It did not matter where she was. What mattered was what she had done to prepare for our arrival. The alien commander turned back to face the room. The humans had spent those 6 months turning their entire solar system into a weapon. Every asteroid, every satellite, every piece of space debris had been turned into something dangerous. "What do you mean?" asked a young officer with blue fur. Their mining stations in the asteroid belt were not just mining anymore. They had become missile platforms. Thousands of rockets all aimed at the paths our ships would have to take. When we entered the system, those stations opened fire. Zethkar began pacing again. But that was not all. Their communication satellites started exploding around our ships. Each one was filled with nuclear explosives. The humans had sacrificed their own communication network to hurt us. Even their civilian ships became weapons. Cargo haulers filled with explosives would fly at our vessels at faster than light speed. One moment you would see an old freight ship limping away. The next moment it would jump to light speed and ram into one of our battleships. The room was very quiet. The young officers were beginning to understand that this had not been a normal war. "I remember one cargo ship captain named Roy Baker," Zethkar continued. "His ship was old and slow, meant for carrying food and supplies. But when he saw our fleet, he loaded his ship with every explosive he could find and flew it straight at our flagship. We shot at his ship, but he kept coming. Over the radio, we could hear him talking to his crew. He was telling them about his grandchildren, about how they would grow up free because of what he was doing. Then his ship hit us." Zethkar touched a scar on his arm. "I was on the bridge when his ship exploded against our hull. The blast threw me across the room and broke 3 of my bones. But Baker was just one man. There were hundreds like him. The siege lasted 8 months. Every day we lost ships to human attacks. Every day they found new ways to hurt us. They used everything as a weapon: space junk, broken satellites, even ice from the outer planets." The alien commander sat down again. But the worst attack came from inside our own ships. A human officer named Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster led 30 soldiers in a boarding attack on my flagship. "How did 30 humans board your ship?" asked a young officer. "They hid inside a damaged cargo container," Zethkar explained. "We brought it aboard thinking it held supplies we could use. Instead, it held 30 human soldiers with nothing to lose. Foster and her team fought through 12 decks of my ship. They killed hundreds of our crew members. We had to use poison gas to stop them, and even then they kept fighting until they could not breathe." Zethkar's voice became quieter. "But before she died, Foster got on our communication system. Her last words were broadcast to every human in the solar system. She said, 'We are not trapped in here with you. You are trapped in here with us.' Those words spread through the human forces like fire. After that, their attacks became even more fierce. They stopped trying to just defend Earth. They started hunting our ships. Foster's boarding team had planted a computer virus in our systems before they died. For weeks afterward, our ships could not coordinate properly. Our fleet was scattered and confused while the humans picked us off one by one." The alien commander looked at each young officer. "We were winning the war. We controlled most of the space around Earth. But every victory cost us more ships and more lives. And the humans never seemed to run out of people willing to die fighting us. After 8 months, I had lost half my fleet. The humans still had not surrendered. Every day brought new attacks, new tactics, new ways for them to hurt us. I began to wonder if we could ever really defeat them. That was when something happened that changed everything. Other species in the galaxy started watching our war. They saw how humans fought. They saw that it was possible to resist us." Zethkar's voice became very serious. For the first time in 1,000 years, other worlds began to question why they obeyed us. The human example was spreading, and that scared our high command more than any weapon. Commander Zethkar rubbed his temple with one of his 4 hands. The memories of the war still gave him headaches after all these years. The young officers waited patiently as their instructor gathered his thoughts. The war had been going on for 2 years when I finally began to understand what we were really fighting, he said. It was not just about Earth or human colonies. It was about something much bigger and more dangerous. He stood up and walked to the center of the room. We had captured thousands of human prisoners during the fighting. Most other species become quiet and obedient when they are captured. They accept their fate and wait to be released or traded, but human prisoners were different. How were they different? Asked a young officer with green scales. They kept fighting even in prison, Zethkar replied. They would attack guards, try to escape, and cause trouble every day. We had to use twice as many soldiers just to watch them, but that was not the strangest part. The alien commander paused. The strangest part was that they talked to us, not to beg for mercy or ask for better treatment. They talked to us like we were equals, like they were not afraid of us at all. One prisoner changed how I thought about everything. His name was Major Steve Parker. He had been captured during the battle for Mars, one of the human colonies. He was badly wounded and should have been grateful that we gave him medical care. Zethkar walked back to his chair but did not sit down. Instead of being grateful, Parker asked me why we were fighting this war, not how we planned to win or when it would end. He wanted to know why we thought we had the right to make other species obey us. I told him it was the natural order. The strong rule the weak. That is how it has always been in the galaxy. Every species accepts this truth. The alien commander's voice became thoughtful. But Parker laughed at me. He said humans had a different idea about the natural order. He said all thinking beings should be free to make their own choices, even if those choices were wrong. I thought he was talking nonsense. Freedom is chaos. Without strong leadership, species fight each other and destroy themselves. The Alteran Empire brought peace to the galaxy by making sure everyone knew their place. Zethkar finally sat down. But Parker kept talking. He told me about human history, about how they had once been ruled by kings and emperors. He said they fought wars to get rid of those rulers because they believed freedom was more important than safety. That makes no sense, said a young officer with red fur. Safety is more important than anything. That is what I told Parker. Zethkar agreed. But he said something that I still think about today. He said, "You think we are crazy for fighting a war we cannot win. But we are not fighting for victory. We are fighting so our children will be free to make their own mistakes." B. Alien commander looked at each young officer. He said humans do not fear death the way other species do. They fear something else much more. They fear being told how to live by someone else. I did not understand at first. Death is the end of everything. How can anything be worse than death? Zethkar's voice became quieter. But as the war continued, I watched how humans acted. I saw mothers send their children to fight, knowing they might never see them again. I saw old men and women take up weapons when they could barely walk. I saw wounded soldiers refuse medical help if it meant they would miss the next battle. They were not fighting to live. They were fighting for the right to choose how they died. The room was very quiet. The young officers were trying to understand something that went against everything they had been taught. Parker explained it to me during one of our talks. He said, "You want to keep us safe by making our choices for us. But a life where someone else makes all your choices is not really life at all. It is just existence." Zethkar stood up and walked to the window again. That was when I realized we were not fighting a war about territory or resources. We were fighting a war about ideas, and ideas are much more dangerous than weapons. The human idea was spreading. Other species who had accepted Alteran rule for centuries began to ask questions. Why did they have to pay tribute? Why could they not choose their own leaders? Why did they have to send their children to serve in our armies? The alien commander turned back to face the room. Reports started coming in from across the Empire. Small acts of rebellion on dozens of worlds. Workers going on strike. Colonies refusing to send tribute. Local leaders asking for independence. But the most dangerous thing was what happened to our own soldiers. Many of them began to question why we were fighting. They heard Parker and other human prisoners talking about freedom and choice. Some of our troops started to wonder if the humans might be right. Zethkar sat down heavily. I remember the day when Captain Nick Thompson, a human frigate commander, held off an entire battle group by himself. His ship was old and small, but he used it to protect a convoy of refugee ships trying to escape the war zone. Thompson fought for 6 hours against 50 of our ships. He knew he could not win, but he kept fighting anyway. The battle footage was broadcast across the galaxy before we could stop it. I watched species that had been peaceful for thousands of years suddenly start building weapons. I saw planets that had never questioned our authority begin to demand representation in our government. The human example was like a disease, spreading from world to world. The alien commander's voice became sad. Thompson died when his ship finally exploded, but those refugee ships escaped. And everywhere that footage was seen, more people began to believe that resistance was possible. That was when I knew we had already lost the real war. We might defeat the humans in battle, but we could not defeat the idea they had planted in the galaxy, the idea that no one has to accept being ruled by someone else. Zethkar looked at the young officers. Parker was right. We were not fighting humans. We were fighting the belief that things could be different. And that belief was much stronger than any weapon we had. Commander Zethkar sat in silence for a long time. The young officers could see he was thinking about painful memories. When he finally spoke again, his voice was very quiet. The war ended in the 3rd year, but not the way anyone expected, he said. By then, 17 worlds had stopped paying tribute to the Empire. 3 entire sectors had declared independence. Our forces were scattered across the galaxy, trying to put down rebellions instead of fighting humans. He looked at the faces watching him. The High Command finally understood what I had learned. We were not just fighting one species anymore. We were fighting an idea that was spreading faster than we could stop it. So you defeated the humans? Asked a young officer hopefully. Zethkar shook his head slowly. No, we asked for peace talks. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. The young officers could not believe what they were hearing. The mighty Altaran Empire had asked for peace from a species they could have destroyed. The human representative was General Pete Adams, Zethkar continued. He was a small, quiet man who looked like he should have been a teacher, not a soldier. But this gentle-looking human had destroyed 3 of our fleets and captured 2 of our planets. General Adams was nothing like what I expected. He did not gloat about their victories or make impossible demands. He just sat down and asked what we wanted to discuss. The alien commander stood up and walked to the window. I told him we were willing to accept human independence. We would leave Earth and all human colonies alone if they would stop encouraging rebellions in our empire. But Adam said something that shocked me. He said humans had never wanted to defeat the Altaran Empire. They just wanted to prove that defeat was not inevitable. Zethkar turned back to face the room. I did not understand what he meant at first, but Adams explained it very clearly. He said humans did not fight to conquer us. They fought to show other species that resistance was possible. The treaty we signed was unlike any agreement in galactic history. Instead of demanding territory or tribute, the humans asked for something much more dangerous. They wanted the right to send military advisors to any species that requested help with their defense. One of the young officers looked confused. Why was that dangerous? Because it meant humans would teach other species how to fight like humans, Zethkar replied. They would spread their tactics, their weapons, and most importantly, their ideas about freedom. The alien commander sat down again. Adams made it very clear that humans did not want to rule anyone. He said they just wanted to make sure no one else could rule everyone. Those words still give me nightmares. I asked him what would happen if we refused the treaty and continued the war. Adams looked at me with those calm human eyes and said, "Then we will keep fighting until every species in the galaxy knows that freedom is possible." Zethkar was quiet for a moment. I realized then that we could not win. Even if we destroyed every human ship and killed every human soldier, the idea would survive. Other species had already learned the lesson. The galaxy would never be the same. So we signed the treaty. The war officially ended 3 months later. A young officer with purple skin raised her hand. What happened after the treaty? Exactly. What Adams promised, Zethkar replied. Within 5 years, 27 species had requested human military advisors. They learned human tactics and human ideas about government. Some declared independence immediately. Others negotiated for more freedom within the Empire. Today, the Altaran Empire controls less than half the territory it once ruled. Dozens of worlds govern themselves. Many more have formed alliances with each other instead of depending on us for protection. The alien commander looked at each young officer. The humans kept their word. They never tried to conquer anyone or build their own empire. But they did something much more dangerous. They taught everyone that empires could be resisted. Do you regret fighting the war? Asked a young officer. Zethkar thought for a long time before answering. I regret the lives that were lost. I regret the pain and suffering the war caused. But I do not regret learning what humans taught us. What did they teach you? They taught me that strength is not about making others obey you. Real strength is about choosing to do what is right, even when it costs you everything. The alien commander stood up slowly. I have studied human history since the war ended. I learned that they have always fought for freedom even when they fought each other. They have never been content to simply obey whoever was strongest. And now that idea belongs to the whole galaxy. Species that were ruled for thousands of years now govern themselves. Worlds that never questioned our authority now make their own laws. Zethkar walked to the center of the room one last time. Some of my fellow commanders think the humans destroyed our empire. But I believe they saved us from becoming something worse than tyrants. They forced us to earn loyalty instead of demanding it. A young officer near the back of the room raised his hand. Sir, do you think humans might someday turn their attention to other forms of injustice in the galaxy? The room became very quiet. Everyone wanted to hear the answer to this question. Zethkar smiled for the first time since the lesson began. It was not a happy smile, but it was not entirely sad either. I hope they do, he said. And I hope I live to see it. Remember this lesson above all others, he continued. Humans are dangerous not because they are the strongest or the smartest species in the galaxy. They are dangerous because they refuse to accept that anything is inevitable. That belief, that things can always be changed, that defeat is never final, that freedom is worth any price, that is their greatest weapon. And now it belongs to all of us. The old commander walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back one more time. Class dismissed, he said quietly. Go think about what you have learned today, and decide what kind of soldiers you want to be. As the young officers filed out of the room, many of them were already thinking differently about strength, about power, and about what it really meant to serve in the galaxy's military forces. The human lesson had been taught once again.